Our interview for the Apex today has been 211 miles per hour on a McLaren F1, being shot at whilst road testing a Ferrari California, has previously held the Guinness Book of Records record for the fastest lap of a UK circuit, and has recently got back from being the first journalist to road test the new McLaren Speedtail. Indeed, we are delighted to welcome the renowned journalist and esteemed road tester Andrew Frankel to the Apex interview series. Today, we're going to talk a bit about how he got into the automotive world, the art of road testing, the evolution of motoring journalism, and also hear a bit about his Instagram-only magazine, Drive Nation. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us, and let's begin.
Yeah, it's a very great pleasure. Very happy to be here.
So what were your first automotive memories, and was there a particular car that started the passion?
I kind of didn't have a choice. I grew up, I had two older brothers and a father who were completely obsessed with cars from literally my earliest memory. I don't know where my father got it from because his family weren't interested at all, but they like sort of, food and drink. They were just part of my life. I don't think it occurred to me that one had any options of these things. If there was a car, he had a 4.5 litre Bentley. He always wanted to own a vintage Bentley for reasons best known to himself. And in about 1970, when I would have been 4, he bought this 4.5 litre Bentley. And I guess it arrived at the same sort of time that I was sort of becoming aware of cars and everything else. And that car is still in the family. It's been in the family 50 years now. If there was one car that got it going, it was that. And it's a car that I've done all sorts of things in that car over the years. I've driven it massive distances. I've raced it at Le Mans Classic. I've done everything. That car probably actually means more to me than any other.
That's a great choice. And those pre-war vintage Bentleys are just superb. I've done a couple of rallies myself in a 4.5 litre. And then how did you end up going into automotive journalism specifically?
Honestly, the honest answer to that question is by being terrible at everything else that I tried. I never thought. I don't think I even thought about being a car journalist because it's like sort of thinking you're going to be an astronaut or a movie star. It wasn't something that I thought that somebody like me would ever get to do. But I tried to be something in the city. I think I was probably the only person who managed to lose money in the city at the end of the 1980s. I was a bond dealer and a commodity broker, and I got fired from both those jobs fairly quickly. I then tried to become a lawyer and got through about a year of the degree course and dropped out of that. It was desperation more than anything else. I was sitting at home, no money, no prospects, no qualifications, no nothing. And a friend of my brother's just alerted him to the fact that Autocar were advertising for a job for us all, like a junior road test assistant. And the only reason I even applied for it was because by the time I saw this ad, it had been around for so long, I kind of presumed it had already gone. So I rang up to ask if the job was still there. And they said that it was, but only because they'd had so many applicants, they hadn't had time to go through everything. And the only smart thing I did was I asked if there was anything I could do to make my CV stand out a bit. And they said that they'd stupidly only asked for people to send in their CVs and no examples of their writing. So if I wrote something, that might help. So I did, and they presumably saw. I couldn't even type. So my brother had a secretary who typed up some nonsense I wrote about a Renault 5 that I had. I sent it in and I got an interview and took it from there. So very lucky, really. I wouldn't recommend it as a way for most people who want to become a motoring journalist to get into the business today. I kind of winged it and fluked it and lied quite a lot as well. But I got in the end.
And had you always read magazines, automotive magazines from a young age? Was it something you'd always been interested in?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know if you asked this question to lots of people you do, but for me, it was always Car Magazine. I mean, Car Magazine in the 1970s, when you had guys like Doug Blaine and Mel Nichols and Leonard Setright and George Bishop, and then going on to Steve Cropley and Gavin Green. I mean, they were the guys who kind of lit the fire, they were my super. I can remember once I was sitting in a hamburger bar with my father. I must have been about 11 or 12 in Holland Park, and a red Ferrari drew up outside, and this big bearded bloke who I instantly recognised as Steve Cropley got out of it and came into the hamburger restaurant to pick up his takeaway or something. And I just I sort of kind of went puce and wanted to hide under the table because honestly, to me, it was like watching Marilyn Monroe walk into a room, which I know sounds slightly strange, but I mean, this man was a sort of God to me. And my father suggested I go and introduce myself, which was clearly ridiculous. And then, for many years, and in fact, still now, I get to work with a bloke. So Yeah, so it was the guys who edited Car Magazine because they were fearless in the 1970s and the 80s. They wrote beautiful. I mean, their writing was so good. The magazine looked beautiful, and they did all these incredible escapist stories with supercars. And yeah, I've been reading it ever since.
Yeah. Yeah, funny enough, one of our previous interviewees, Graham Hunt, said exactly that. It was a Mel Nichols article, I think 1977, where he took, in Car Magazine, where he took a Lamborghini
Oh, boy.
Countach,
Yeah,
Silhouette and Urraco, and he said
yeah,
that's what really lit his passion for
yeah.
automotive,
Yeah.
the automotive world, which is interesting. And who were your inspirations out of that bunch of people?
Well, I mean, I guess it was Nichols because, he was kind of the first person. I mean, if you read a very kind of atmospheric, colorful drive story these days, somewhere down the line, that writer, even if it's only indirectly, will have been influenced by Mel Nichols because he was the first person who started, that I'm aware of, who started writing those sorts of stories, who kind of went beyond the information. This is the sort of straightforward road test. This is a car. This is what it does, and actually realized that there was a rather bigger, better job that could be done. There was entertainment to be had there as well, and actually started crafting stories. And yeah, I mean, to me, these things were magic. I mean, back then when I was sort of away at boarding school, I always knew which day of the week the car came out. And I used to rush down to the newsagents. And if it wasn't there, it kind of ruined my day. And if it was, I couldn't wait till I got back to the boarding house. I'd have to sit down on the pavement outside and at least read something because I was so desperate to get my teeth into it. And I think, today, obviously, the media scene is so utterly different. There's so many more different ways and in many very better ways in which you can consume it. But I don't think people necessarily do that sort of thing so much, which is perhaps a bit of a shame. But, I was very lucky to have been brought up on, what was world-class journalism, which just happened to take place in an automotive context.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, you mentioned that, and obviously these days there seems to be a constant requirement for information to be condensed. You've got Twitter, which requires a maximum of 280 characters, I think it is. Instagram is obviously a bit better. I think it's 2,200 character limit. And then let's not even talk about the millennial attention span, like myself, which is apparently no longer than a blip of a throttle. Do you think there'll always be a place for long-form automotive journalism like Mel's, or is the world going to all bite-sized pieces?
No, I think there will always be a place for it. And in fact, we're seeing a bit of a resurgence. And you will have seen magazines like Magneto and Road Rat. We always thought once, the internet turned up that print would disappear. And that hasn't happened. It will take a different form. There will probably be less of it. But I think that there will always be people who want to consume stories about cars, not just in a sort of, I think we'll do both. I mean, and as a writer, that's fantastic. I mean, one of the things that I feel most blessed to be able to do is, write tiny little bite-sized chunks, be it for Drive Nation, which I think we'll talk about in a minute, or on Twitter, and also to be able to write books. I've recently completed books about Bentleys and Aston Martins, which have gone on for, tens of thousands of words. And between that, I think there will be magazines, and I think increasingly so. They will be subscription only. They'll probably be quite expensive, but they will look beautiful, and they'll have big, long stories in them. And I don't see any reason why, there's so many technologies, haven't there, which have kind of, which have been there. And then everybody said, they're going to be, everybody said that books would die when e-readers came along, and people said that, that radio would die when television came, and it never happens. The market changes, but the demand remains, and I think it will. That's a very long answer to a short question, isn't it? But it's I think we'll be okay for a while yet.
I guess regardless of the medium, there's always going to be a requirement for road tests, which is, of course, one of the things you're most famous for, and not only for Autocar, but I think you've been the chief road car reviewer for the Sunday Times for 15 years and so on.
I was, yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about the art of road testing?
The art of road test. Well, write for your reader. I think that's number one. I think there are lots of people who do what I do, who write for themselves, or understandably, they write for the person they think is buying the car. But the person, if you write about, if I'm, I've been lucky enough to have been in a couple of, 1,000 horsepower hypercars in the last couple of weeks. And I know that 99.9, if not 100% of the people who are going to read those stories are not going to be in a position to buy one of those things. So, writing a sort of buyer's guide to a McLaren Speedtail isn't really, serving your reader very well. You want to put him or her in the driver's seat and just, and that's really the job. And to understand what is important. Obviously, in every car, there are a different set of priorities. To be able to understand what is important about them and to communicate. You have to be able to do three things in my job. You have to be able to drive to a reasonable standard. You don't have to be Lewis, but you have to be reasonably good. You have to be able to understand the car. Ronnie Peterson, the 1970s F1 driver, he was an amazing bloke and an incredible driver, but he used to drive his engineers insane because when they say, what's the car doing? He couldn't tell them. He just couldn't understand. He knew because he was such an instinctive driver. He just knew how to drive the car, but he couldn't set a car up because he didn't really understand what the car was doing. And we have to understand what cars are doing so we can explain to readers what's good and bad about them. And then obviously the third thing you have to be able to do, which is the most important, is you have to be able to write. You have to be able to communicate like that, because otherwise the first two are meaningless. If people don't read what you write, they're not interested in what you have to say, then you've fallen at the first fence. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And if you're a freelancer like me, write the story you've been asked to write to the length you've been asked to write it and submit it on time. It really is as simple as that.
Good advice. I have to say, out of all your road tests, I think the one I'd be most envious of was your 1994 test of the McLaren F1 for Autocar, where I believe you hit a remarkable 211 miles per hour. That must have been a pretty special day.
It was a weird day. It was May the 2nd, 1994. And I only remember the date because it was the day after Ayrton Senna died. You can imagine landing that road test was not the matter of a moment. It still, to this day, is the only independent, genuinely arrived at set of figures that have ever been recorded for an F1. As I said, it had taken a long time to set up, and it was all arranged for Bruntingthorpe on May the 2nd. And then Ayrton got killed on the Sunday. And you know as well as I do what that man meant to that company. And I just kind of thought they weren't going to show. I just kind of thought that they would just think, well, with the last thing in the world we want to do is be sort of messing about with the idiots from Autocar. And yet there they all were. Jonathan Palmer was there, and Ayrton, I know, was his absolute hero. And Gordon Murray was there, who designed Ayrton's championship-winning cars and everything. And I actually remember the professionalism of those people as much as I do the car. The car itself was just a completely different level to anything. We'd driven, XJ220s and F40s and that sort of thing by then, but the F1 was a completely different level, and that was fascinating, and it was a memorable experience for that. But the context is really everything. And then once we'd done all the numbers, and we were done at Bruntingthorpe, I drove it up to North Yorkshire. And I remember that drive as much for the relief of handing the keys over once I got there with the car and myself still in one piece, as I do anything that happened on the drive. It was so fast by what we'd experienced. And you do acclimatise and you do get used to it. And I drove it again about a year ago. And it still feels like a properly fast car, but not, it probably isn't as quick as a 720S now in the way that it gets down the road. But at the time, I'd never experienced anything like it. And it was a surreal experience because I got to the stage, because I was quite young at the time, I was still in my 20s. I just I really worried that I wouldn't be able to help myself, and I would just end up doing something really, really stupid because I didn't have the self-control to hold back. I can just remember getting up to, I think we're in Helmsley in North Yorkshire, and just giving the car to somebody else and thinking, thank goodness, I've got away with it.
Yeah, you don't want to do a Rowan Atkinson in a McLaren F1, unfortunately.
No, ideally not. No, but you know what? I know Rowan, and I know, but Rowan is a fantastic. I've raced against Rowan. He's a really, really good pedaler, and an F1. Particularly if it's in any way down, is not an easy car to drive, and there are lots of other drivers who have had many bigger accidents than Rowan had. But yeah, absolutely. These days we take all the stability systems and the safety systems so much for granted. And it's quite interesting to drive a car with 627 horsepower, which weighs 1,134 kilos, absolutely naked with nothing to protect you. Because it does kind of remind you, but you'll know this from racing old cars, historic cars. One of the reasons I love historic cars is it's just you and it. And, if you cock it up, you've only got yourself to blame.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I see in the last few weeks, so 26 years later, you were the first journalist to drive the McLaren Speedtail on public roads. Yeah. What was that like, and how did it compare to the F1?
Can't really compare the two, just because the circumstances were so different. The F1 was, I think we were in it for 3 days, full figures on an airfield, huge amounts of time on the road, on the moors. The Speedtail was last week. That was a much more sort of a grab and go. It became apparent that it was possible. And I went and got the car from Woking. And funny enough, with another Speedtail in convoy. So there were like 2 Speedtails together, which was quite a strange sight. They just wanted to have a chase car. I just went and drove it around West Sussex. So I haven't driven it on a track. So I haven't done crazy speeds in it. I certainly haven't strapped any timing gear to one. McLaren will tell you that one is not the replacement for the other, despite the fact that it's got that amazing center steer driving position, and they're only making 106, which is the same number as they made F1s back in the mid 1990s. But it's much more of a sort of luxurious long distance car rather than a sort of lightweight supercar. The sense of occasion is the same, because it's great to be first. If you do what I do for a living, being first to anything, as we were first to road test the F1, as I was first to drive the Speedtail on the road, you get a real sense of pride out of that. I regard the Speedtail as unfinished business, because what I haven't done is driven it properly fast somewhere yet. So I'm looking forward to doing that another time.
Yeah. And you talk about your nerves also with the F1 returning it in one piece. Has a road test ever gone drastically wrong? And is it true that you once got shot at mid-test?
Yeah, no, I did get shot at. Yeah. So yes, it was Ferrari California in Sicily. I was doing those. We have to do them on every time we get out and drive a car. Seems these days we have to do sort of lurid oversteer shots, which I don't mind doing them on the track. That's fine. I don't really enjoy doing them on the public road because there are too many variables. But you kind of have to do it, and so I was doing it. I'm making quite a lot of noise, and so you sort of drive through the corner. And then you turn around and you go back, and photographers being photographers, you kind of sometimes you have to do it 20 or 30 times. And I noticed when I was turning around at one end, there was a bloke standing there with a young boy, not looking terribly happy. And the next time I came around, he disappeared. So I thought that was okay, but he'd returned the time after that, and he had a shotgun in his hands. And I thought that was interesting, but I thought he might be out bagging rabbits or something. And then the next time I came back, he wasn't there. But as I turned around, a shot rang out above the car. I can remember turning around and trying to get out of there while at the same time being as close to under the dashboard as I could possibly be, because I was in a convertible car. So I was quite vulnerable. I got away with that and went back to the photographer and said, I think that's probably enough of that for now. As far as stuff that's actually gone badly wrong, I guess the worst, although we actually kind of got away with it, was the DB7 Aston Martin in, when would it be, 94, I guess. So this was a completely last minute thing. Somebody else had got a DB7 and they were going to publish, and we heard about it. And so we had to rush something into print. So I went and collected a car. And I drove it to Wales, did all the photographs, and then handed it to a colleague who was to drive it to the Millbrook test track to get all the figures from it, while I went back to the office and started writing the story, and then he was going to phone the figures through. And he went to Millbrook and did the figures and was recording a maximum speed on the car when at 160 something, the car just went up in flames. And he managed to get it stopped, but it didn't have a fire extinguisher on it. There were no fire extinguishers nearby. And by the time any kind of fire truck got to it, I mean, the car was completely and utterly gone. So yes, we totally torched the DB7 prototype. But the one thing that I was pleased of is because it's such a fraught business, we always did the top speed run last, so that all the other figures were in the bag. So we got the numbers. We probably didn't get the top speed, but that was the only thing we didn't get. And the only price we paid was a somewhat flambé DB7.
Oh dear. Well, funny enough, our interviewee last week was Ian Callum, so I imagine he wasn't sort of too pleased about having a smouldering wreck return back after all his work.
I don't think there was much to return, to be honest. I think by the time they put it out, there was no car left.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing. And I imagine over the last 30 years or so, you've driven some of the world's greatest roads, in probably some of the world's greatest cars as well. And then living in the Wye Valley in Wales, I'm sure you have some of those roads right on your doorstep. So for someone thinking of dusting off a sports car in the garage after lockdown, where would you direct them to in the UK? And if they would go to the continent, again, where in the continent would you suggest road-wise?
Yeah, I mean, driving in the UK, I think the key increasingly, because the roads are getting so busy, and obviously lots of cyclists there, is, if I want to go and drive a car properly, I just set an alarm. You can go and drive, you could, so where I am in the Wye Valley, we have the Brecon Beacons pretty close by, and okay, it's quieter at the moment because of COVID, but normally, you could go up there in the middle of summer thinking, oh, wow, wonderful roads. And you can't actually drive a car properly on those roads because it's caravans and it's congested and it's bicycle and it's all sorts. So I think job one is wherever you live, set an alarm. If you've got a car that you want to drive, it should be worth getting up early for. And certainly during the summer where it's kind of light at, 4:30 in the morning, I quite often will get up and go and do a couple of hours on deserted roads in a great car, be back before anybody else has woken up. And you'll have more fun doing that than you will in days driving around in daylight. But in the UK, the Welsh mountains are fantastic. You can go to Dartmoor, but there's a speed limit all over it now, which is a bit restricted. North Yorkshire moors, we used to go testing at all the time because it's very quiet up there and there are some amazing roads. And obviously there's Scotland. West coast of Scotland is still some of the best places you can go driving. And Snowdonia. So, even in our small, congested little country, there are still great places that you can go driving cars. In Europe, I would say the most underrated place to drive a car is northern Spain. It's so quiet there. There are some really, really good roads there. You can go to Italy, and a lot depends on what time of year you go and that sort of thing. You definitely can have decent drives in those places. Germany it really is quite fraught just because of the congestion. But yeah, if there was one place that I would go if I wanted to reliably drive great cars in Europe, probably be northern Spain.
Interesting. I know you share my passion for classic cars and historic racing. Indeed, you co-drove with my father in the TT at the 1999 Good Revival in his Austin Healey Sebring Sprite. And yeah. I think, sadly, the title of your subsequent article in Motorsport of Sprites and Gremlins rather summed up that weekend, which was not a huge success. Indeed, I think 21 years later, I can still remember some of your exact wording from that article, including that its handling was schizophrenic, with this, I think the certainty of a bullet ricocheting off a building, which... wasn't a glowing review, but I think it did get subsequently improved. But I guess given the imperfections and character of old cars like my father's Sebring Sprite, against the clinical efficiency of a lot of modern cars, in general, do you find old cars more exciting to write about?
Oh, 100%. I find old cars more exciting to write about, drive about, be in and about in all ways. My day job, in the main, I'm very lucky. I still get to test. I don't really do classic road cars anymore. I do a few, but not many. But I still do get to do quite a lot of track tests of all racing cars, which makes me. That's probably my favourite thing to do professionally. But I always think of my day job as being testing road cars, and my hobby, my passion, if you like, is old cars and old racing cars. You will know as well as me that. It's all about involvement to me, and modern road cars just distance you from the sensations of driving. And I don't want that. I want to feel what I'm doing. I want to feel the road. I want to feel, on the stage, not in the crowd. And I don't want to just be a director, telling a car what to do. I want to feel part of the action. And that's, as absolutely as well as me, that's what old cars bring you. Because, frankly, because they are a bit useless, because they need to be managed, you have to use your skills. I mean, if you're racing a car on drum brakes, you know that if you just use the brakes to the maximum, from lap one, you won't have any by the end of the race. Old tires, you have. I race a Ford Falcon in the Spa 6 hours every year. I've done it for God knows how many years, more than a decade. And the car, if I'm honest with you, is absolutely useless. And it's probably what I love most about it, because it just has to be cared for and managed and looked after, because, if you don't, you'll bin it. And even if you don't do that, you won't finish the race. Old over new every day of the week.
Yeah, it's always a partnership, not a case of you being just a passenger, which is the key.
Correct.
But and in 2018, you founded Drive Nation, an Instagram-only car magazine with Dan Prosser, which I've been thoroughly enjoying these last couple of years. So, what's it all about, and what are you trying to achieve with Drive Nation, or have indeed achieved? It's obviously doing very well.
Yeah, I mean, Drive Nations, it's interesting. I mean, partly it's I've just always had this desire to do different things, which is why I do everything from, little tweets to enormous books, and as much as I possibly can in between. But Dan realized that nobody was doing car journalism on Instagram. And okay, it's a mainly photographic platform, so I kind of get that. But we suddenly realized that there is an enormous audience out there. And even if we just tapped into a tiny, tiny amount of it, that would probably amount to rather more readers than you might get if you did a car magazine. And so he very kindly asked me if I wanted to sort of fall in with him. And we've now got 36,500 people read Drive Nation, and despite the fact that we've had no money to invest in it. So it's just had to kind of grow organically. But we've got a podcast as well, which is quite popular. And we do little other bits here and there. We are starting to attract a bit of investment now. But more than anything else, it's just a fun thing to do. It's fun for two reasons. One is I just love working with my mates, and I really like the format. But secondly, if you do what I do for a living and you're a freelance motoring journalist, you're kind of, at the beck and call of your clients. And if, Autocar or Motorsport or anybody else I work for want me to go somewhere and do something, then that's kind of what I go and do. With Drive Nation, I can do what I like. I can think to myself, well, I'm going to write about this week, or, I'm going to ask Dan what he thinks about writing about that. And it's paddling your own canoe. That's probably the best thing about it, apart from the people on the other side, our audience, who are fantastically interested, involved, engaged, enthusiastic bunch of people, and we have a real rapport with them. So it's totally different to anything else I do, and I love every minute of it.
Superb. And before we go to our quickfire questions, my last long form question is it true that you held the Guinness Book of Records record for the fastest lap of a UK circuit? And also, as a footnote, I believe you even wrote it into the book yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that was a complete con. It came about because I happened to be sitting in the Autocar office one day when the telephone rang, and I picked it up, and it was a bloke from the Guinness Book of Records saying, we need someone to edit the motoring pages because whoever was doing it had disappeared. And because I picked up the telephone and I went, I'll do it. And it was my first ever freelance gig, and they paid me 50 quid for it. But it suddenly occurred to me, because basically I'd always wanted to do, I'd always wanted to do 200 miles an hour, which I managed to do slightly later on. And I'd always wanted to get in the Guinness Book of Records, and all the records just looked absolutely impossible. But when I suddenly found myself editing it, I suddenly thought, I can invent a record. But the problem was I didn't want to set a record. I wanted to break somebody else's record. So what I did is I invented this record called the fastest lap of a circuit, of a UK circuit by a production car. And I then got my boss, Howard Lees, to go up to Millbrook in a Ferrari Testarossa and drive. I think he drove around at about 170 or so. So that was fine. So that was a record which went into the book. And then Ferrari replaced the Testarossa with the 512 TR, which was a faster and more stable car. So I just went up there and did 175, and bang, I was in the book. But yes, I broke a record which I created simply so that I could break it. Which, I mean, a bit of a con, but hey ho. And I got in again recently, and rather more prosaically, for driving a car through 14 countries on one tank of fuel, which was a profoundly tedious thing to do, but it got me back in the book. So yeah.
Brilliant. And then on to our quickfire question. So who is your automotive hero?
Sterling Moss.
Yep. Good choice. Historic cars or...
Do you want to explain why, or do you
I'd love to hear why. He's one of my heroes as well.
Okay, because he's the only person like that who became a very close friend of mine, and I think actually not for how fast he was, but for the way he went racing. The fact that he gave up the 1958 World Championship to Mike Hawthorne just out of honour, and I think that I can't admire someone who is not as engaging out of the car as he is in it. And I think that Sterling was the complete racing driver, and I miss him very much.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been lucky to race against him once. If actually it was his last race at Le Mans when he got out of his Porsche and he said that was the first time in my whole career I've ever felt unsafe in a car, and he retired at that exact point. But what an amazing man! And also I have to forgive him slightly that he did ask my mother on a date back in the day. I think whilst my mother was going out with my father, so I'm not sure my father was particularly happy about it. But I don't think they ever went on the date. But there we go. I'll forgive him for that. And but what an amazing man, obviously hugely missed. And then next question, historic cars and modern cars. I think I know your answer to that. I think you already answered that one, but just in case.
Yeah, historic.
Yep. And then best car ever driven.
Road car or racing car, or doesn't it matter?
One of each.
Racing car, Porsche 917, road car, Ferrari F40. I find myself in the somewhat unusual and fortunate position to have driven two 917s. I've driven a sort of standard sports car, and I've driven the Can-Am car, the 1100 horsepower Mark Donoghue thing, and just everything about the 917, just how powerful it was, how successful it was, how dangerous it was. It just presses every button I've got. So, and the F40, I just haven't driven a more exciting road car than that. Any chance I get to get in an F40, I'll go anywhere, do anything to do it, because they're just magical things. Yep. And on the other side of the coin, the worst car you've ever driven. Worst car I've ever driven. I can't stand, and I hope nobody listening to this has one of these things, but I really can't abide sort of modern crossover SUVs, because they're just not good at anything. They are really lowest common denominator. If I had to name one of them, maybe a BMW X4. But in terms of most disappointing car, probably a Ferrari 348, which when it came out in 1990, was just a horrible, tricky, malevolent thing. And I actually drove another one a year or two back for a story, and it was just the same. It was still everything I don't want a Ferrari to be honest. Yeah. And then last question, which we've asked all our interviewees, is money, no object, free car garage. Oh, dear. Okay, so you've got to have a recreation, a usable car, and a racing car, I think. So the usable car would probably be a brand new G-Wagon, a diesel G-Wagon. Road car, because I like range and I'm not interested in the performance if it's an everyday car. The road car would be McLaren 720S, and the racing car is easy, a Lola 270 Mark 3B. Yep. Good choice. Well, there we go. Well, thank you so much. That's Andrew. It's been absolutely fantastic. Some great stories and some great insights. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you event soon. And and obviously, any of our readers that haven't been onto Drive Nation, you can follow them on Instagram. Is it Drive Nation _ I believe. Drive Nation _. Yep, absolutely. That would be appreciated. Well, Charles, thank you so much for this. It's been great fun. I hope I haven't bored all your listeners to death. All the best with everything, and hopefully I'll catch up with you at a racetrack somewhere soon. Fantastic. Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon.